haven't done one of these in what feels like years now, and it probably has been years, so it is about time we put together a complete system build guide for you. So let's go do that, and for this one, we're going to build a gaming PC that's both cost effective, and I think you'll agree looks great. Something you can be proud of, something that invokes a bit of excitement whenever you walk in the room and see it. I think this thing does exactly that. So we'll start by going over all the individual components, then we'll look at things like thermals, how it performs, and yeah, all the good stuff that gets you guys excited about building new PCs. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their CryoSheet graphene thermal pads, which are an excellent alternative to thermal pastes. They offer very high thermal conductivity with no liquid components, so they can't dry out and therefore don't degrade over time like pastes and even liquid metals. CryoSheet is very easy to use, it's extremely durable, and is available in a range of sizes to suit most applications. I've personally done some high-end GPU testing with CryoSheet, and the results were impressive, very similar in fact to that of liquid metal, but without the mess, and of course, no risk of drying out. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so let's start with the CPU, the Ryzen 5 7600. This is an obvious choice for the build as it's both affordable and very powerful. At $190 US, it's one of the cheapest AM5 processors, and really it is the cheapest model you should bother with. The 85G and 8400F are both very average and not worth the asking price in my opinion. In terms of gaming performance, the 7600 is very similar to the 5800X3D, which is the flagship AM4 gaming processor. But with the Ryzen 5 7600 being an AM5 processor, it will afford buyers a nice upgrade path. You're also looking at having to spend around $90 US more to get the 8-core version, the Ryzen 7 7700. And while a good processor, for those strictly gaming, the 7600 is a better value deal. So that's the processor sorted, now we need to find a motherboard. The best option here for our particular build is the ASRock B650 PG Lightning, and there are a few reasons for this. Firstly, we want an affordable B650 motherboard. It also ideally needs to be an ATX board, as this will be a mid-tower system, and it has to be a board that we've tested and proven not to be crap. The PG Lightning ticks all of those boxes. At $150 US, it's relatively affordable for a B650 motherboard. The 14 60-amp power stage V-core configuration works very well, powering even the Ryzen 9 7950X with ease. Now, initially, I had planned on using the MSI Pro B650-S Wi-Fi, as it is $10 cheaper and ticks many of the same boxes. However, the MSI board does run very hot with the 7950X under an all-core workload, hitting 113 degrees for the VRM, and while performance was still excellent, as the system didn't thermal throttle, for just $10 US more, the ASRock board gets those temps down by a little over 40 degrees. And this is because it uses power stages rather than cheap discrete MOSFETs. So although the MSI model technically gets a pass and will work well with most Ryzen processors, very well with the 7600 for example, I feel for $10 more the ASRock power delivery is worth investing in, as it is of significantly higher quality. That said, the ASRock board doesn't include Wi-Fi, whereas the MSI board includes Wi-Fi 6E, but of course you can include Wi-Fi on any motherboard for a small price. But that additional cost might push you towards the Pro B650S Wi-Fi. So in summary, I'm going with the ASRock B650 PG Lightning for its superior power delivery, but if you never plan on buying a Ryzen 9 processor, now or in the future, the MSI Pro B650-S Wi-Fi should suffice, and at $140 US, it's the most affordable ATX B650 motherboard on the market right now. As for the memory, I recommend low latency DDR5 6000 stuff for Zen 4 processors, especially the non-3D V-cache models like the Ryzen 5 7600. For all of our AM5 test systems, we use G-Skill's DDR5 6000 CL30 Triton Z5 Neo RGB 32GB memory, which can currently be purchased for $110 US. Or alternatively, there's Team Group's Team T-Force Delta RGB DDR5 6000 CL30 32GB kit for $105 US. So depending on pricing and availability in your region, either of these kits should work well, and for this build I've picked up both of them so you can see both of them in action, how they look and how they suit this build. Now for the storage, I've gone with Team Group's Team Cardia A440 Pro 2TB SSD. This is a Gen 4 x4 NVMe SSD with a DRAM cache, and it supports sequential read speeds of up to 7,400 megabytes per second with write speeds of 6,900 megabytes per second with an endurance rating of 1,400 terabytes of written data. So this model has been selected for its excellent performance along with its affordable price tag, though availability in the US looks quite limited right now, but it was at least cited at $95 US earlier in the year. Here in Australia, availability is good and it can be had for $250 AUD, which is a very competitive price. For example, DRAM-less 2TB SSDs, they start at just shy of $200 Australian. As for the graphics card, this is an important item of any gaming build, and sadly there are few good options this generation, at least in terms of value and what they offer over the previous generation. That said, I have unexpectedly chosen the Radeon RX 7700 XT, a product that I didn't give a particularly positive day one review, though that's not uncommon for Radeon GPUs as they typically launch at less desirable price tags than what you'll actually find them for months or sometimes even weeks after they first go on sale. In the case of the 7700 XT, it was released at $450 US, which isn't a great price for that product, but today they can be had for as little as $380 US, and that's a far better price for such a product. My recommendation here is to go with the cheapest model you can find, and then just quickly confirm that there's nothing particularly wrong with that model by checking out a few reviews, though I think you should be pretty safe there. For our build, I picked up the ASRock Phantom Gaming 7700 XT, which can be had for $410, or at least it could be at the time of making this video. I've just checked quickly and it has crept back up to $450 US, and I'd avoid it at that price, but I'm sure it will head back down towards $400 soon. But not to worry, ASRock does have the Challenger version, which is a dual fan model, and that can be had right now for $380 US, so I recommend getting that model instead. And just lastly, sadly, there isn't really a GeForce competitor at this price point. The 8GB RTX 4060 Ti is a bad joke in my opinion, and while the 16GB model is much better, you're looking at having to spend upwards of $460 US, making the ASRock Challenger 7700 XT a better deal in my opinion. Now for powering everything, I've gone with the Colink Regulator Gold ATX 3.0 850 watt power supply because it tests well, and at $130 US, it's very affordable. It was also just $180 AUD here in Australia, so a good value option in either the US or Australia. Also, if you do opt for a GeForce Series graphics card, there is a 12-volt high-powered connector, and all cables are fully blacked out. They're 100% modular, and the unit itself is very compact at just 140mm long. Then for the case, we have the Fantex XT View DRGB in black. I was pretty shocked how affordable this thing is, just $80 US for what is a seriously good looking case. Included are three 120mm RGB fans, side and front glass panels, which look stunning, and loads of room for radiator support. Then finally, we have the cooling options, and frankly, you don't need to do anything here, as the Ryzen 5 7600 comes with a box cooler, but like all box coolers, it's not particularly great. So I recommend getting the Arctic Freezer 36 CPU cooler in black because it looks good, it works way better than the box cooler. Oh, and it's pretty cheap as well, just $37 US, and somehow we can buy it locally here in Australia for as little as $40 AUD. So it's a great deal in Australia, probably less so in the US, but it will keep the 7600 cool and quiet while looking nice in your system. The Freezer 36 really is a great quality product. It looks good, performs well, and the installation is a breeze. The way the fans connect to the heatsink is exceptionally well designed, certainly the easiest and best method I've come across for attaching fans to a tower style heatsink. It's well worth spending a little bit extra here to get something of this quality. Now, that said, I have tried to convince a few friends that all they needed for a particular build is a modest air cooler, but very few of them have listened. So if you're like my mates, you'll want an AIO, because reasons that don't necessarily need to make sense. And if that is the case, then the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 240mm is a great option for this build. And should you upgrade the CPU, it might even end up making sense. In any case, I do have this cooler on hand, so I can show you what it looks like in the system and how it performs. And then just for a fun third crazy option, I got the Team Group Siren Duo 360 ARGB CPU and SSD AIO. Because why not? We can do it. I'm not necessarily recommending that you do. This unit only comes in white, for example, and it's much more expensive, so probably doesn't make sense for this particular build, but as I said, we have it, so why not install it and see how it looks and, of course, how it performs. I think it does look pretty amazing, even though, sadly, there is no black option, so the white does look a little bit out of place in this particular build, but I still think overall it looks pretty neat. Okay, time for some testing, and we'll start with the box cooler. After 30 minutes of all-core load using Cinebench, the box cooler saw a peak temperature of 98 degrees with a fan speed of 2,550 RPM, which is pretty loud. The VRM also peaked at 46 degrees, which is actually very cool, but of course we are using a low-powered CPU, and this is a very powerful V-Core VRM, so those results are pretty well expected. Overall, the system did work well in this configuration and would be perfectly fine for gaming. However, the Arctic Freezer 36 did look much better and, more importantly, performed way better, dropping the peak CPU temperature down to just 79 degrees with a fan speed of only 1400 RPM, making the system extremely quiet under load. The VRM once again peaked at 46 degrees, so I'd say an optimal configuration in terms of price and performance. Then, with the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 240mm AO installed, this system looks stunning, though it does cost quite a bit more at $100 US, and is certainly overkill for this build. We're also only looking at a 3-degree reduction in peak operating temperature for the CPU, and it was only a whisker quieter, though it does dump almost all of the heat generated by the CPU out of the case, so that's a bonus for the other components. Also, the VRM fan on the block did reduce the peak VRM temperature to just 41 degrees, so a nice looking component that does work well, but it probably isn't worth spending twice as much when compared to the air cooler, despite how well it works and how good it looks, but again, that'll be up to you to decide. Then we have the extreme kind of dumb overkill option, the Team Group Siren Duo 360, which would be more useful had we gone with a higher end CPU and maybe a PCIe 5.0 SSD. In any case, it does look very good, and performance was also great, though not amazing compared to the much cheaper 240mm option. What the Siren Duo 360 does do really well is cool the SSD. The Team Cardia A440 Pro 2TB SSD that we were using peaked at just 38 degrees under extreme load with the liquid cooler, which is very impressive. In comparison, if we were to use just the heatsink included with the ASRock motherboard, it would peak at 79 degrees. And performance overall was quite similar, though I did see more consistent results in Crystal Disk Mark when using the liquid cooler. With the Arctic Freezer 36 configuration, we did see excellent GPU temperatures after an hour of gaming load. The ASRock Phantom Gaming 7700 XT saw a peak GPU hotspot temperature of just 77 degrees, which is very good, and the memory peaked at just 76 degrees. Meanwhile, the VRM never went above 57 degrees, and all of these results were achieved with a fan speed of only 940 RPM, so very impressive stuff there. Now, when it comes to gaming performance, you're best off looking at our Ryzen 5 7600 review, and then all the content that followed that review to check out how that CPU performs, and likewise the Radeon RX 7700 XT review and follow-up content to see how that performs. So I'm not going to waste a heap of time here showing you gameplay using settings that you might not be interested in. So here's a look at Ratchet & Clank playing at 1440p using the very high preset, and depending on the scene, we're looking at around 80 to 90 FPS, but typically closer to 90 FPS, so a pretty good experience overall there. Then with Horizon Forbidden West, we're looking at between 60 and 80 FPS at 1440p using the very high preset, which is the highest preset in the game, and this is native 1440p performance, so enabling FSR, so some form of upscaling or lowering the quality preset, will boost performance further. Then finally, here's a quick look at Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty using the high preset at the native 1440p resolution, and we're again looking at between 60 and 80 FPS. So again, decent performance overall, and you'd certainly be able to crack the 100 FPS barrier with a medium preset or some upscaling enabled. All things considered, for just shy of $1,200 US or $2,000 Aussie, I think this is a pretty great looking system, and it certainly works very well for 1440p gaming, and it should also offer a very good path for future upgrades. That said, it is worth noting that AMD will be announcing, or we expect they'll be announcing, their upcoming Zen 5 series in the next few weeks, so might be worth just waiting to see how that one pans out. Though I don't think there'll be too much on offer at this particular price point. Finally, I should just note that none of the hardware featured in this video was sponsored. I personally picked all of the components, so they're all of my own choosing. They're what I wanted to recommend for this build, and again, it was based on their performance and how they look and how well they all go together, and I'm very, very happy with how this system turned out. But I just want to make that clear that this not sponsored. So we've picked it based on our own testing and that of other trusted sources. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to get more Hardware Unboxed goodness, we have Floatplane or Patreon. You can sign up to either one of those things. You'll get access to our exclusive Discord server where you can ask Tim, myself, and the other members anything about your upcoming build, what components you'd like to use, or if any of these components aren't available, what you should use instead. Stuff like that. We also do monthly live streams where we address questions live. Behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff. There's a lot of cool things there, so check that out if you're interested. But if not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.